So I will get started. So today we're going to talk about online trust and safety, a new dimension for real-time engagement. So I am Tiffany Wang, Chief Strategy Officer for Spectrum Labs. At Spectrum Labs, we use AI to safeguard the online trust and safety. And recently, I also started a new not-for-profit initiative called Oasis Consortium to drive the industry consensus about brand safety. And we can talk a little bit more in the later part of the presentation. And before I start, I want to do a little poll with the audiences already in the chat. Great. I see the votes are coming in. Thank you very much. Now I know there are actually people listening. Interesting. I'll wait for another 20 seconds. So this is really helpful for me to gauge the relevance of this presentation for you. Great. Seems about 2/3 of the audience said you're not experiencing the user safety issues on the platform, and 1/3, and it's growing about, 1/3, about 1/3 of the audience have experienced user safety issues on the platform. Thank you very much for the poll. Now let's get started on this talk. So welcome to the session, Online Trust and Safety, a New Dimension for Real-Time Engagement. So first of all, let's take a glance of the headlines. Really, in the past year or so, trust and safety is really taking the center stage of the headlines. Having been working in the space, what I see is actually an evolution, a paradigm shift. 2-3 years ago, people used the online trust and safety solution as a remedy. It's usually after the platform got a bad publicist, got scandals, and in the headlines. But very recently, especially since the COVID, you probably have heard the news, such as major brands like Unilever started to boycott major platforms like Facebook. The most recent signal, which was quite encouraging, Facebook promoted its brand safety executive to be the new CMO. So in other words, what we have seen is a paradigm shift is user safety and brand safety is rising into the C-suite conversation and a boardroom topic. Well, it's worth looking at what is actually behind this paradigm shift. Why this is happening, why it is actually taking over the whole news headlines. Well, apparently, personally, before working this space, I also wonder, just as 2/3 of the audience mentioned, your platform might not have experienced toxicity issues. However, the stats shows that 2/3 of the users between 18 to 29 years old actually experienced hate speech and harassment online. Toxicity is actually more prevalent than what I thought to be. What we also found out is there is attrition risk once the users are exposed to unsafe content. The problem is that if we only rely on reactive reporting from the community, there is less than 20% of the community would ever report. So in other words, we know that there's an issue about toxicity. We know that is related to engagement and therefore would drive the revenue loss. However, you have to take a proactive approach. So next, what if there are enough individuals get disengaged? What would happen? What if there is an individual takes a screenshot on the platform where he or she is interacting with a snapshot of a brand adjacent to some controversial content? Well, 2 months ago, an eMarketer survey shows that really 40% of the advertisers are extremely concerned about their ad placement is adjacent to unsafe content, because that drives the attrition of their target consumers. And that was exactly happened to Facebook. So about 2 weeks ago, I published an article on Forbes about Bust the 4 Myths about brand safety. Over there, I explained the challenges and the priorities for the platforms to drive the user safety, and about how actually brand safety is actually centered around the user safety, and why brands and the platforms have to come together to have industry standards designed and adopted. So we see how individuals can leave your platform, cause the user disengagement. We can also see if the platforms have ad revenue, how advertisers could follow if the platforms is considered as an unsafe place. Now, let's look at what the solution should be. Well, it has been long studied in the marketing space how a user can be engaged, right? So we identify all the users come on board. We cookie, we SDK, we have first-party identity. We really track their interactions. We use all channels to really engage them. And then we really set momentum to really drive engagement. At the end, we analyze the customer profiles. And this loop goes on and on. We know how to do the consumer journey engagement. But what is less talked about and studied about is how we create a platform health journey to secure the path to engagement. So the journey that we recommend is we need to take an understanding about what's going on in the community. We need to understand when they interact with us, what is the toxic behavior happening? And we need to understand how we prioritize them and respond to them. And in the end, to really evolve the whole human moderator and the machine moderation solution to let a moderation engine to speak the language our platform is speaking. Why it is important? Because every single investment you are putting into real-time engagement to engage your users could be very simply undone if there's one or few instances of toxicity happens. So before we move on into the second section, I want to use some real world use cases, talking about how actually leading platforms across gaming, dating, and online learning to address online toxicity issues. I want to take a very quick second poll. So I will stop the video because apparently I cannot take the poll as I share the screen. So bear with me for 1 second. So I'll take the second poll here. Let's mark the red. Some issue to post it. Here you go. The question is, do you use in-house or outsource the content moderation solutions today? Wait a second. I'll wait for another. It seems there are more votes coming. Right. Well, it's about a 50-50%. Okay, so I'll give some background about how the industry looks like today and the key challenge through the second part of the session. Great, thank you for your poll. Great. So in the next session, I will give a few real world use cases. But a little bit background is we see 50% of the audience do not have content moderation solutions yet. So as you can see in the headlines, is mainly the social platforms are in the spotlight, and major platforms like Facebook and Twitter are often in the headlines. But online trust and safety issues are way beyond the social platforms. Gaming, dating, online learning platforms, and verticals are the verticals we have been working with, and also are the verticals we're presenting at today's conference. So I choose these verticals to talk about. And the second piece of the background is actually most of the platforms started with human moderation solution. So, but the challenge is quite obvious to us. On one side, we really exposed human beings to super traumatizing content, which could cause the PTSD. But also the sheer amount of the data that human moderators are dealing with is actually not humanly manageable. To increase the digital wellness as well as the productivity for humans, but also really in this context to make real time possible, it's extremely important to enhance the human moderation solution with the technology. So let's start with the gaming industry. So this is the butterfly chart that you will see that I use across all use cases. So this is the workflow that at Spectrum we use. So in simple terms, you got the data in, and you choose the disruptive behaviors that your platforms want to look at, and we spin out the results that you can leverage and use to take action on your platform. So that workflow applies to all industries. The difference really varies across the three key components. You can have voice, video, text content coming based on what kind of type of content you have or you want to moderate. And you have different type of actions. It really varies in the gaming industry. From a chat can be automated to be taken off the platform, all the way to a player can be suspended. And in the gaming industry, as you can imagine, bullying, threats are common use cases. But more than that, you have harassment, CSAM grooming, the child sexual abuse grooming, and underage users, which could have really got you into the big troubles. Now, why I started with the gaming industry? Well, I want to highlight the first biggest challenge and component for you to do the content moderation right and successfully, which is context matters. Well, what does that mean, context matters? So for folks who actually already use certain technology solution to do the content moderation, you might know that today the most widely adopted technology is keywords. By definition, the name it sounds is if there's one single word is identified with certain disruptive behavior, then the whole message or the conversation could be actually identified toxic. Well, I want to give actually an example. I'm pretty sure the tech lead of the video might actually block this word of my example. Let's say this is fucking awesome. So the word fucking itself could be profane, but the message itself, this is fucking awesome, could have rather positive sentiment. However, if you put that message in the broader context, it could actually, for example, be confirming a CSAM grooming case. And then you got trouble, right? So that is what I mean by contextual AI. You cannot only use a word-based technology. You have to take into consideration the whole conversation for you to identify if the message is toxic, if this user is toxic. Well, why it is specifically important to the gaming industry? Because there's a lot of trash talk in this industry. It is intrinsic almost to the industry. Well, if the word comes as kill yourself, the word kill can be threatening or violent. However, in a battle game, it could be a strategic move for a team, a group of friends to sacrifice one player to win as a group. So if you false positively identify that message as threatening or automated this message out of the platform, then you really have user experience issue. The gamers got pissed. But the opposite case of that is, for example, the common case of bullying on a gaming platform. Well, by definition, bullying needs to be a receiver, feels certain sentiments, feels bullied. So by definition itself, it cannot be based on a single text or words. It has to be dependent on the whole conversation about how a player receives the message and reacts to the message. In other words, contextual AI is the only way for you to identify a case is actually a bullying case. If you false negatively let go a bullying case, then you really have the community house issue, as what we have talked about will drive the potential attrition of your users as a platform. So as you can see, I want to use the gaming use case to share the most important component to do content moderation right, which is context matters. Now let's move on. Looking at the dating use case. Well, remember, the same butterfly chart and user flow applies also to the dating use case. And you can have, and especially since COVID, video dating becomes a thing because people can no longer meet in person. So it can be the video data, voice data, but we also look at the metadata. So we can talk a little bit more about why this piece is so important. But before that, just like on the gaming platform, real-time moderation is very important. The action can vary from taking the message off the platform. Sometimes when it's so severe, it can be identified and be taken down even before publishing. But all the way to if a very toxic user on the platform, and it will be suspended. And then, as you can imagine, the typical use cases on dating platforms can be harassment, but all the way to, for example, the illegal solicitation. It can be insults and violence. Now, why metadata actually matters, especially to the dating platforms? Look, if you take a step back, thinking about how would you even be able to detect sexual harassment in a super sexually charged environment? How would you tell the difference between a flirtatious message from sexual harassment? Well, it could be exactly the same text to start with. If one party says certain things and the other party responds quite instantly, or we see back and forth engagement between the two users on the platform, then it's very likely two willing parties are engaged in a consensual discussion and talks. And in that case, you do not want to do anything, but especially on certain platforms, it will be encouraged to have those messages and information running on platforms. However, if one party starts with a certain sentence and repeated over and over again, and the other party didn't reply and have been silent, and even we see less engagement of this party on the platform, then we know there could be an issue. That's why the metadata such as the timestamps of the message, the user longevity on the platform and the user reputation score in the past can really much help us to identify what action to take and if certain message and a conversation is actually crossed the line. So the last use case I want to talk about is in the e-learning space. It might be less intuitive to you why e-learning platform can have online trust and safety issues. Well, when we look at the courses with the partners we work with, you could have hate speech or sexual content in the transcripts, both text or audio. And that is the case where you want to moderate out. But especially since COVID, we really see the line between the gaming platform and the online learning platform start to be blurry. The online learning community becomes almost a social community. People have direct message and conversation happening. That's where you actually want to have the real-time moderation. But that is also where I want to highlight another important component in real-time moderation, which is very often I was asked, hey, Tiffany, we want a real-time solution. And I realized what was really asked about is the timely solution. What do I mean by that? If you want to moderate transcripts, you probably do not need under 100 millisecond solution to moderate that. Rather, it can be done overnight or within the SLA you want. Why that matters? Because to achieve the real-time engagement the platform wants to do, the support of the moderation does not necessarily have to be real-time. And when you can do the batch processing for certain category of the content, you can reduce a lot of the cost to achieve the same goal. So there is a fine line between real-time and the timeliness. So I want to take this holistic view about the real-time when we touch on this point. So great. We talked about those components which are important to do content moderation right. We talked about toxicity is an issue. It's related to engagement and revenue. It could cause even the loss of ad revenue. Well, I have to say it is a real hard problem to solve. But if you think about it, if we don't use keywords, but using the contextual AI, let a machinery to understand how the platform speaks, what you need a lot of data labeling, retraining, the feedback loop, and all these actions are costly. Not mentioning that your machinery needs to speak over 30 languages, basically the language that we are dealing with, and you need to speak over 40 different topics. So those are the behaviors we need to identify with our partners and the customers. And across all the real-time engagement content type, text, image, video, and a voice. So that is why we've been in the business for over 3 years, and really through working and partnering with leading platforms to safeguard the community health for over 1 billion users so far. Well, as we move on the journey to find the right solutions for our platforms and the partners, I start to realize there is actually a way bigger problem than finding the solution itself. Is that there is actually no industry consensus as to what is considered to be right. If I take certain actions to safeguard my community, is that enough? Well, apparently, if you look at all the standards and the news, you realize there's always one dominant voice. Public, private, brands, platforms, users. So we really need an industry standard to really let everybody join this movement to identify what is considered to be right. That is why over a month ago, along a few founding advisors and the leaders in the trust and safety space, I started this new not-for-profit initiative called Oasis Consortium. The goal and the mission is to really drive the conversation between brands and the platforms, private and the public, to identify the guardrails for the future of our internet. So I really encourage everybody on this call to check it out. And I think it is the moment for us to action on it. So with that, thank you for your time. And this is my contact with Spectrum and my Twitter handle. So feel free to reach out to discuss more. So we have a couple minutes left. So if you have questions, feel free to type into the chat. Great. I saw a question. Thank you guys. One question I saw is, I wonder how content moderation works in the event chat. Well, the good news is that butterfly chart does apply to all real-time moderation. And in this case, if Run the World, Agora wants, and with everybody's consent, by the way, we care a lot about privacy and security. If anybody is interested, we can take offline to discuss that as well when know your PIIs. But we will take those chats into the engine, and again, you can choose the disruptive behavior models, and we spin that out and take action. So it is nothing really different from if we do that with gaming and dating and online learning platforms. The difference would be what kind of behaviors we historically would see on that platform. That is also, if you remember the platform chart, you actually want to take a kind of house scan of the platform first to understand what type of behaviors you usually should expect and start to moderate from there. Awesome. Great. We are almost on the time. So thank you for everybody's time. So the conference organizer told me if I have time left, let's just take a groovy. So let me see if I can do that here. Here you go. So you might see a little selfie thing there. So feel free to have some fun here. I will start. Thank you, everyone.